It starts in the shadows on streets, where childhood ends early and survival is the only religion. The sound of sirens replaces lullabies, and fear becomes a language learned before English. In the heart of Los Angeles during the 1980s, thousands of children arrived carrying nothing but trauma from civil wars they barely understood. El Salvador was burning, and America was supposed to be refuge. Instead, it became another battlefield. These children were refugees, but the streets didn't care. They were dropped into neighborhoods already ruled by gangs Mexican, Black, and white crews that had spent decades carving territory through violence. To them, the newcomers were weak, foreign, expendable. Beatings came first. Humiliation followed. Protection didn't exist, and so, like every forgotten group before them, they adapted. Mara Salvatrucha later, shortened to MS-13, didn't begin as a criminal empire. It began as a shield, a loose collection of Salvadoran teens banding together to survive hostile streets, hostile schools, and hostile police. They borrowed symbols from heavy metal culture, adopted brutal reputations, and learned quickly that fear traveled faster than respect. Violence wasn't just defense, it was language. Los Angeles at the time was already a laboratory of gang evolution. The city taught MS-13 how power worked. Bloods and Crips taught them structure. Mexican Mafia taught them prison politics. The streets taught them that mercy was weakness. And so, what began as protection hardened into something else entirely. Revenge became ritual, territory became identity, and brutality became branding. The civil wars these kids escaped had trained them for this life. Many had seen executions, disappearances, and soldiers turning villages into graves. Violence didn't shock them. It felt familiar. On American streets, that trauma didn't heal. It weaponized. By the late 1980s, MS-13 was no longer just surviving. It was recruiting. Every beating created another angry kid. Every humiliation became a recruitment speech. The gang didn't promise safety. It promised belonging, something no government agency ever offered them. Tattoos became scars, turned outward proof of loyalty, etched into flesh. The letters MS weren't just initials. They were a declaration. We exist, and we will not disappear quietly. Police crackdowns didn't dismantle the gang. They refined it. Arrests pushed members into prisons, where alliances formed with older, more organized criminal structures. Deportation policies sent hardened members back to Central America, exporting Los Angeles gang culture into countries still bleeding for war. The gang didn't shrink, it multiplied. What America thought it was removing, it was actually planting. By the time authorities realized MS-13 was more than a street gang, it had already evolved into something colder, darker, and far more disciplined. It had learned how to survive pressure, how to replace fallen soldiers, and how to turn fear into obedience. This was no longer about protection. This was about power. And it was just getting started. 1013 does not recruit the confident. It hunts the broken, the lonely, the angry. Kids with unstable homes, immigrant parents working endless hours, or no parents at all. Children already halfway invisible. The gang steps in where family and society collapse, offering something deceptively simple: identity. But identity in MS-13 is paid for in blood. Initiation is not symbolic. It is violent by design. Beatings known as jump-ins last long enough to shatter fear and replace it with rage. Sometimes initiation requires attacking rivals, sometimes killing them. The lesson is immediate and irreversible. Once you cross this line, there is no way back. This is how boys become weapons. Loyalty is enforced through shared guilt. When everyone has blood on their hands, betrayal becomes self-destruction. The gang understands psychology better than any therapist ever could. Fear binds tighter than love. Violence creates memory. Trauma creates obedience. Older members, veteranos, become mentors in cruelty. They teach when to strike, how to torture, how to disappear witnesses. They also teach silence. Talking to police isn't to just betrayal. It is a death sentence that often extends to family members. Girls are not spared. Some are recruited as lookouts or couriers. Others are claimed as property. The gang doesn't romanticize violence. It normalizes it. Abuse becomes routine. Survival becomes participation. Inside MS-13, brutality is currency. The more ruthless you are, the more valuable you become. Mercy is weakness. Hesitation is fatal. Symbols reinforce this worldview. Tattoos mark ownership by the gang over the body. Removing them is nearly impossible without retaliation. Every mark is a permanent reminder that the gang owns your future, your past, and often your death. This is not chaos. It is conditioning. By the time a recruit commits their first murder, the transformation is complete. The fear they once felt has been replaced by a colder emotion control. Violence no longer feels shocking. It feels necessary, normal, and the streets reward it. Territory expands. Rivals retreat. Civilians learn which corners not to stand on. Silence spreads. 1013 doesn't need mass killings to dominate. It needs reputation. One body left in the right place does more than 1,000 threats. Law enforcement sees crime statistics. The gang sees leverage. Prison only deepens indoctrination. Incarcerated members gain status, forming ties with larger criminal networks. Prison becomes classroom, not punishment. Release is graduation. The tragedy is that many recruits don't survive long enough to regret joining. Others survive too long and realize too late that leading is impossible. 1013 doesn't allow retirement. It allows only loyalty or death. The gang doesn't turn kids into killers overnight. It breaks them first. Power in MS-13 doesn't come from money alone. It comes from fear, discipline, and structure. By the 1990s, the gang had evolved into a decentralized but deeply organized machine. Individual cliques operated independently, but loyalty to the brand was absolute. Orders flowed not through paperwork, but through violence. Leadership was earned, not elected. Survival, brutality, and strategic thinking separated foot soldiers from shot callers. A leader didn't need to speak loudly. Their reputation spoke for them. Prison became the gang's command center. Inside, MC-13 learned patience. Long sentences forced long-term thinking. Alliances formed. Rules hardened. Internal discipline became ruthless. Anyone who endangered the gang through recklessness or cooperation was eliminated. Outside, the streets followed orders shaped behind bars. Human trafficking, weapons sales, and contract killings followed. 1013 didn't just react to opportunity, it engineered it. Communities became captive markets. Fear became enforcement. What made the gang especially dangerous was its adaptability. When police targeted one clique, others filled the vacuum. When leadership fell, replacements emerged without ceremony. The organization didn't mourn, it recalibrated. Deportation unintentionally strengthened the network. Members sent back to El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala brought American gang structure with them. In countries weakened by corruption and poverty, MS-13 found fertile ground. Prisons there became even more powerful than those in the U.S. The gang now operated across borders, beyond any single legal system. Orders crossed countries. Violence followed. Yet power bred paranoia. Loyalty was constantly tested. Suspected informants vanished. Internal executions reinforced obedience. Trust became rare. Fear ruled from the inside as much as from the outside. This internal violence kept the gang sharp, but it also sowed cracks. As MS-13 grew more visible, it attracted more attention. Media coverage turned the gang into a symbol of uncontrolled brutality. Politicians named it an enemy. Law enforcement adapted tactics, forming specialized units and intelligence-sharing networks. The more MS-13 relied on terror, the more predictable it became. Power had given the gang dominance. It had also painted a target. War was inevitable. Rival gangs challenged MS-13's territory. Internal disputes turned lethal. Violence escalated not just in frequency, but in symbolism. Murders became messages. Bodies became warnings. In Central America, entire neighborhoods fell under gang rule. Children were recruited younger than ever. Refusal meant death. Families fled or submitted. Governments responded with mass incarceration, packing prisons with gang members who only grew more connected inside. 1000-13 was no longer hiding. It was ruling. But war creates exhaustion. Constant killing breeds mistakes. Younger members acted impulsively. Attention increased. Informants emerged, not out of courage, but desperation. Law enforcement learned to exploit internal fractures. Rivalries were leveraged. Reduced sentences were offered. Families were relocated. Slowly, silence began to crack. High-profile murders shifted public tolerance. Communities that once feared retaliation began cooperating. International task forces formed. Intelligence crossed borders faster than the gang could adapt. For the first time, MS-13 faced sustained pressure from every direction. The gang responded the only way it knew how, with more violence. It didn't work. The collapse didn't happen in one dramatic raid. It happened quietly, arrest by arrest, informant by informant. Leaders disappeared into maximum security cells. Communication fractured. Financial networks were seized. Safe houses were exposed. Tattoos became identifiers instead of symbols of power. Fear shifted direction. Inside prisons, segregation weakened command structures. Outside, younger members found themselves leaderless, reckless, and exposed. Violence continued, but without coordination, it only accelerated the downfall. Governments learned that brute force alone wasn't enough. Prevention programs emerged. Witness protection expanded. Community policing rebuilt trust inch by inch. 1000-13 still existed, but it was bleeding. The gang that once thrived on invisibility had become too infamous to hide. Today, MS-13 is no longer the unstoppable force it once was, but its shadow remains. Former members carry scars they can't remove. Communities still rebuild. Children still inherit trauma they never chose. The gang story is not just about crime. It is about abandonment, about systems that failed and violence that filled the void. 1000-13 didn't appear from nowhere. It was created by neglect, hardened by brutality, and sustained by fear. Its legacy is written in prisons, graves, and broken families across continents. And it stands as a warning of what happens when lost children are left to raise themselves in the dark.